Welcome, welcome, thrice welcome to JWC Livestream. And we have a special message for you this evening. Oh, there's Amber.
Oh, hey, how are you?
Hi. Our regularly scheduled program will not be seen tonight. Instead, JWC Autopsy. Instead of JWC Autopsy, we will have a special. This is JWC Monstercraft. What is JWC Monstercraft? Well, we're going to tell you in a moment, but first, we must have introductions. My name is Ricky, author name Richard Andrew Olkus. We also have with us Tom Tiernan. Tom, are you there?
Yeah, I'm good.
Very good, sir. Tom, as you can see, is a Lunarian Gray. His people originally came from the Arcturus star system several million years ago, but he's here with us on the show today. It's wonderful. And we also have a very, very special guest, Amber Danson. We haven't had you on in a while. How have you been, Amber? It's good to see you.
I've been dealing with some health issues, but I got everything sorted out now, so I'm back on track.
That's very, very good to hear. Health is important for our crafts so that we can be coherent enough, lucid enough to be creative and whatever. So I've certainly had my bouts of health issues over the years. But you look like you're doing well, and it's good to have you back. How have you been, Amber? How has your creativity been? What projects have you been working on?
Well, what I decided to do most recently was catalog all of my ideas. So I went through all of my notebooks and wrote down everything viable, made a list, and have been making outlines of all of it.
Oh, very cool.
Very
cool.
That way, if I die with unfinished work, somebody else will have a good outline and they can finish it.
Stands to reason. Whatever the muse gives you, whatever comes out of unconsciousness as far as storylines, it's fretful to think of it getting lost or obliterated. So I don't blame you for making records. It's also a useful exercise, in my opinion, for storycraft. For like you're designing a whole series, like multiple arcs going deep. It's like, to me, that's very, very beneficial for a writer, a creative writer to do. Well, that's great. Plotting for the future, no doubt about it. Tom, how about you, man? How's your creativity going?
Oh, high speed. I just wrapped up another John Pencrum story this morning. I've been playing with the format. I think what I might do is every Pencrum story at the end will have a report that he end report, and basically a case wrap up of finishing up loose ends and just resolving anything that would happen. I thought that would be very interesting, like a police report or a report for any kind of a government agency would have end cap resolution, and I'll have to see if that's going to work. So that's going to be like the 8th of 10 Pencrum stories that I'm assembling for an ebook. So I'm on to a new one called The Deadly Mile. Which is a kind of a takeoff on the Beast of Bray Road.
Is the Beast of Bray Road? Is that a dog man?
Yeah, in Wisconsin, and
I've heard that thing is quite fearsome. That people who encounter it never much forget it. I was listening to this podcast years ago about a woman who was chased into her house by one of these things. She had like she swaddled babe in her arms, and she got through the door and it was like sniffing on her front porch. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they're seeing out there, but cryptids inform folklore, Yep. They inform folklore. It's the first place you should search for inspiration for monsters, which, that's what we're about tonight, should be folklore. Just to get my creativity out of the way, I'm going to be resuming the Athenaeum project soon once Narrative B is completed. I feel like that's another like 18 to 20,000 words. David's doing a wonderful job on that project. It's a book that we're co-writing, collaborating on. I've been writing some poems, coming back writing poems here and there, mostly gruesome, dark-spirited ones, as they've been called. Essays, sometimes here and there. And I hit the Compass City hard. I got about a quarter of it done, but I put it down for this project I'm working on called Exsanguinator, The Shroud of Death's Valley. It's projected to be a 40,000 word novella of vampires from space. Very, very violent, monstrous vampire logic. A new paradigm, though, and I'll explain more as we enter the field of monstercraft. So I've babbled enough about my creativity. Now it's time to get to the meat and potatoes. What is monstercraft, you may say? Well, when you write fiction, especially fantasy, some realms of sci-fi, certainly anything supernatural, horror, cosmic horror, involves the creation of a creature. Xenobiology for sci-fi, but cryptozoology for almost everything else. And a lot of times it's a combination of the both. So if all those stars are up there in the sky, if they really are there, and I believe they are, that means that there's, innumerable worlds, countless worlds. It's inconceivable. And on those worlds, anything could be growing. If the laws of nature apply there, then perhaps evolution, perhaps design, however you want to call it. For the sake of our argument, that's the question of paradigm. Did the monsters happen because things happen, or did the monsters happen out of an act of hate? Were they created as weaponized organisms? Like you think about a dragon guarding treasure, or you think about, a certain werewolf happens to run around here and it revolves around X, Y, and Z. Stuff in nature is cool when it happens naturally, but sometimes when you get a wizard, a warlock, a mad scientist, some kind of demented sorcerer, multidimensionally minded, or an errant god passing through your space-time continuum just decides, well, it's time for this to happen now. That happens. When that happens, monsters come, and we're talking about inhuman monsters, okay? There's enough monster that lives in people sometimes for them to qualify, but I'm talking about inhuman monsters, meaning non-human monsters, non-human intelligence, and possibly from a universe. How did Lovecraft put it? The creature came from beyond the Einsteinium space-time continuum. That was his materialistic way of saying from another universe, because of the limited understanding that the main characters the main characters grasp on this aberration flowing from elsewhere. That left him grappling for words, trying to wordsmith and put stuff together, because it's not like he's got a handle on dealing with alien life or life from another universe. It doesn't happen to him every day. So that's what we're dealing with, the paradigm of monstercraft. Now, I'll elaborate little bits by little bits. I don't want to blabber because I'm going to turn the floor over to Tom, and then we'll go back and forth. Amber, Tom, because we all write monsters, so we all got something to say. Tom,
right.
What's your handle on monstercraft? Like when you sit down, assuming it doesn't just bolt into your head like with a muse flash, when you sit down to create a monster, what's usually the source of your inspiration? How do you go about it?
Well, I've always been interested in monsters since I was a little kid, and I like the ones that come from out of nowhere, so to speak. And my recent monsters, past 4 or 5 years, I've tried to concentrate on creating something that's never been seen before. And so I have in my Pencrim series, I've been fiddling around with an extraterrestrial threat that visits once in a while, and Pencrim takes care of it. And I finally got a handle on something that comes from, I'm not sure where, could be extra dimensional, could be extra terrestrial. It arrives in a body of water. It could be a lake, it could be the ocean, and it basically creates its own fog bank as it travels. So
Nice.
it could stalk you, and you would never know it was there until you turn around and there it was.
Especially on a foggy night.
Right.
On a foggy night, it would be impossible to know when that thing
it like
you know,
add its own fog to the fog that's already there, making pea soup.
Yeah, you're done.
Yeah.
You'll never know.
I thought that would be really menacing to have something that you know, especially if it's like a lake in a forest. These things sort of in the fog sort of resemble tree trunks. And at the top, there's like a mushroom head type thing. And so if it's standing in the forest and it's deep fog, it could be there. You could walk past it all day until it's ready to strike and feed.
Yeah.
So those unknown monsters from the unknown, or I've always liked to create like the crate. Trouble with crate 214A.
Yes.
It's something that was found in the Alaskan wilderness and frozen solid, and stuck in a box and brought to this laboratory. And all of a sudden, one night, there's the day it arrives, they're gonna take it out of the box and keep it frozen and examine it. There's a power outage, and it thaws out and goes after the two people that happen to be staying late at night to catch up on work. I thought I love the claustrophobic atmosphere of this. They might know the office building inside and out, the corridors and the stairs, but that does not help them, because this thing travels like you wouldn't believe. It's hungry.
Grease lightning, yeah. That is often how the predator is, especially driven by hunger. And it's a wonderful thing to have misted monsters from another plane, like you're saying, from out of nowhere, or what I usually say elsewhere that's not anything like our own. We have examples of that in literature. I mean, if you read from Skeleton Crew, Stephen King's, The Mist.
The Mist.
Yeah, that novella with those lobstrosities and those tentacled things, like the tentacles coming under the door in the back room. I mean, that thing is dripping with Lovecraftian imagery. My collection of Lovecraft has a foreword by Stephen King and a quote by Stephen King. Stephen King said that Lovecraft was the greatest horror writer of the 20th century, and that's Stephen King saying that.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a feather in Howard Phillips's cap there. The other one that I would love to mention to ornament the occasion is the Eternal Champion series. Michael Moorcock, when he writes, the Dreaming City, especially the subsequent novellas, the Elric of Melnimide saga. Elric's cousin Yorkun uses sorcery to summon this growling mist that comes from another world, it's portology, like a portal opens up, and this thing starts invading, and his Melniboneans, who are not human, by the way, they got bigger, cat's eyes, and they're plain touched, like some kind of demonic stain in their blood or whatever. They are running in terror from this thing as it comes out at them, because it's just a groaning, sorcerous horror. And it's all it knows of us is hunger, that we're ready for a devouring. Its monstrosity cannot be comprehended by a mortal, So Amber, What do you think about monsters from elsewhere?
Well, I didn't do too much in the way of creating like interdimensional monsters. I always found it challenging enough to create simple planetary ones.
Fair enough. Fair
Terrestrial
enough.
ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and those that are involved with our ecology and our physics, you know, that
Mhm.
are from here. So then, a better question would be, when you sit down to craft monsters, assuming they don't just lightning bolt newsflash occur to you out of the blue. Like I got plenty of stories where
Hmm.
monsters just emerge from either I missaw something or whatever. But when you do it, what's your philosophy? How do you sit down and do that?
Well, generally what I do is just sit down and think about all of the things in folklore and Dungeons and Dragons that I'm familiar with because I used to sit around and read the monster manual for fun.
Me too, especially
Yeah, I've got
especially.
a version that's got so many pretty pictures in it, so I could really picture the monsters and all of that. And I would just sit there and study it. So whenever I'm coming up with my own thing, it kind of just comes to me with the muse flesh that you were talking about because I've just looked up a whole bunch of monsters. I've looked up the cryptids, the folklore things, the
Hmm.
Hmm.
No, yeah, that's wise, and I have a similar angle when it comes to those things myself. Because I've been running like tabletop role playing games ever since I can remember. I started in like 98, 99. And one of the things about running tabletop that is beneficial for a fiction writer, especially for fantasy, when you set up a D&D campaign, it's not unlike you're outlining a novel. It's really not dissimilar. Not in my process.
True.
But more so, the concept of monsters, because of their inhumanity, they're difficult to recognize. It's hard enough to quote unquote stat monsters that are in our world, like beasts, like how fast does a cheetah run? What's the pounds per square inch in a dire wolf's jaw? You know, D&D helps you to stat the monster, and that's a higher dimensional thing. That helps you realize, well, it's this fast, it's this strong, it's this smart. It has wings so it can fly. It has fins so it can swim. Dimensionalizing stuff like that is a very, very good idea because it forces you to think about it and really like process it, and it informs your muse. So when you sit down to write this thing, you have some idea of how it's going to display its power or what its weakness might be. So its motives start to dimensionalize from the stats. So any role playing system that you could trust, I mean, and those monster manuals are just cool to thumb through, like Amber's saying. Like especially, I like me a second edition monster manual. Like like I understand some of those illustrations are like, but I think they're beautiful. Like they take me like right back to like where I was because I used to read all those Dragonlance books and stuff back in the day, for better or worse.
Hmm.
But no, that's a great idea, Amber. Anybody in the audience, especially those who are hip with tabletop, that should be right away. You should be doing that. People are going to say, "Oh, it takes so much time." How else are you going to research this thing other than really reading like unbelievable books that describe fantasy and stuff? How else are you going to figure it out, Tom?
Yeah.
How about you, man? When it comes down to this whole concept of statting monsters, what's your process for like figuring out how a monster is, how it behaves and whatnot? You know?
My creatures, a lot of them are otherworldly, other dimensional, and I like to leave mystery involved, like the one room unfurnished about the house where people disappear,
Yeah, that's
right?
right. Yeah.
And it turns out to be some extra dimensional thing that's mimicking the room, and that's all you know about it.
Yeah, it was
And you'll ever know. I like to leave a little mystery left by people. What the? Where in the world could that have come from? That it's just feeding off of the honey dripping into the room and the furniture someone puts in there, and once in a while someone goes in there to investigate, and it's a very yummy professor that gets eaten, and so that's one thing. The unknown, I leave a lot of it unknown, because if you put too many details in, it spoils it. You give away, I like to have people try to picture what in the world something could be. And the creatures in the story that I just did about the creatures in the fog, that's all you know. It kind of resembles a tree trunk, and it's got like a bushy top part of like a cap of a mushroom, and also it has one enormous eye just below the cap, and that's why they dub the creatures Cyclops. And they, that's all I think I might ever tell the audience, no matter how many of the Cyclops stories I write, is that it's I'll leave it unknown. Lovecraft had a way of doing that too. He gave you 2/3 of the creature and left out locomotion or the way what it eats, or what the back end of it looks like. Like the Dunwich Horror is like supreme horror story.
There is some sort of telepathy going on here, because I was about to reference the Dunwich Horror. There is that, Tom. There's the concept of mystification, like what you're doing with the misted monster. It's a parlor trick, but it's necessary for the mystification of the creature. It must either lurk in darkness or in some forbidden environment, or it brings the forbidden environment with it, like a scourge, a mantle for its own self-preservation.
Right.
It's using it as an advantage. So that's really a splendid thing to consider when you're writing a monster, is to leave some of it in mystery. Like if you watch Alien, you don't even see much of the thing for quite some time. He goes Hitchcock, and it's like when you do finally see it, there's so much tension built up. That's the key when it comes to monsters, is the developing of tension. There's a number of ways to do that, and we're going to talk about that. But the last thing, as far as monstercraft, to cycle or not to cycle, okay? By that I mean generation, the power, the generative powers. Your Cyclops, how many of those Cyclops are there, Tom?
Stories, I have 3 planned.
No, I mean the creatures themselves. Although that's good to hear too.
The first story that I did, it was only 1. Basically, I'm picturing that these things are they've just discovered the Earth, and they're sending scouts out, onesies, ones at a time, to kind of feel out what the food is like on this new world. And who knows if there'll be more, they'll arrive in droves or half a dozen. Or I have a story involving the United Witches of America, another off branch of John Pentrum, where one of the head witch of North Carolina comes to Pentrum and says, I have something's going on in, say, Winston-Salem, North, something near the ocean or big lake. He goes, I really trust you. Could you come help me take a look and try to figure out? And I go down there, and it's at least 1 or 2 of the Cyclops. So I figured I would integrate 3 Pentrum and the witches with the Cyclops. It would be interesting. I like doing stories where I also introduce a new element, like the one I just did about Lake Champlain, where the monster is killing people for no reason. I introduce John Pentrum's second wife. He just happens to meet her. She's in the director of the Maritime Museum there, and he said, and she knows she's an expert on Champ, and there's instant attraction between the two of them, and he's not looking for a new wife, but she's looking for somebody and she finds Penkram incredibly fascinating. No one unlike anyone she's ever met, and
well, yeah. I mean, he's quite a unique fella and a gentleman besides, so it stands to reason.
So the Cyclops stories are, I'll have to see where it goes now that I figure I've got a handle on what they are or what they're after. What they do is they're like a wasp. They'll inject something into you that liquefies everything in your body except the bones, and then they suck all the liquid out of your body and just leave this dried husk.
So that's how they feed, which is an important cycle because it's central to the monster's agenda, like what it's about. Like any other organism, you put a bunch of tater tots on the table. I'm the monster to those tater tots. I'm gonna come and eat them up. Those tater tots are gonna be horrified to see me. So that's the whole point. But getting down to the other fact is how many tater tot eating creatures are there, and what is the source of their generation? Like in the sense of the Cyclops, Tom, do they reproduce, or were they designed in a lab, or did some god open his hand and they came to be, but however the monster happens, when you sit down to, because there are certain monsters that are unique monsters that are put together just as a one-off. And their creator is like, I can barely handle this one thing that I did. But when you add procreation to it, then there is no one thing. Then it turns into, eventually, if you let it go, there's a civilization of monsters. Think about at the Mountains of Madness, the idea of the elder things, the starfish-shaped truncate creatures with the fans, the membranous fans, the tentacles and whatnot. The various organs, they somehow through their science created these things called Shoggoths. And I love the notion of a bio-industrial singularity, a creature with such intellect that it has a facility with genetics that it can just, I'll just make this thing. Like a carpenter, like building a table, but they just build this thing that comes to life and has a will of its own and things that it wants to do. So that's a question I would have for you guys. Like when you make monsters, do they always have procreation, or what is your philosophy on the one-off? Amber, why don't we start with you?
Sorry, I was making a quick idea note.
No, that's what it's all about. Inspiration is the highest coin in the realm. You never need to apologize for that. So to rephrase the question, do your monsters procreate, or do you make runoff monsters that are just an endangered, last of its kind thing as it comes into existence?
Well, most of them are more or less natural creatures. They're just that unique to certain areas.
Regional.
Yeah.
Regional.
Otherwise, mostly I just borrow from the monster manual because it's just so handy. And it's funny you should mention second edition, because that's the one I got. Big old white second edition monster manual, fully illustrated.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I have the one that has the darker cover with the fantasy art.
The demon on the cover.
Yeah, it's in the other room. I show that stuff to my cousin and whatever, so he gets the idea of like how awesome it was back in the day. The best thing you could have hoped for during D&D days was like HBO or whatever. There was no internet, there wasn't even a red box, you know what I'm saying? So Monster Manual of D&D for a gamer, that was amazing. Yes, you allow your monsters to inhabit their environment in sort of a natural way, as if they arose from evolution or a creator, and you'll use regionalization to guide their population and And yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. That's another factor for people who are listening in. When you're creating a monster, they have territory. You know, they have like a lot of them have like a certain threshold for what climate they can be in. They like certain temperatures. They eat certain things. And then they want to, during a cycle of procreation, they want to build some sort of lair or nest so that they have a private place to do their business. So stuff's not, other monsters aren't bothering them. It's like they'll snarl or hiss or roar or something, and then the message will be comprehended. And it's like they always talk about, oh yeah, you never mess with a she bear. Yeah, you don't mess with a bear under any circumstances, but you definitely don't come between a cub and a she bear. Whatever it is that the she bear does to you is not the she bear's fault. There's only one natural law that should really bear in significance when it comes to monsters. It's the idea of parents protecting their young. Like, the monster comes to steal your young, you're going to try to kill the monster because you don't want your babies to get carried away into some gruesome fate. It's the same thing with the monster. The monster's out there going, well, my babies need to get fed and they need to grow up and become big bellied papa monsters that go about doing their own things, or you know, stern-faced mama monsters that are going to make more and more babies, and maybe whole civilizations will come to an end. That's the point behind monsters. They have life cycles, and you want to map out a life cycle for the point of realism. You want to map out a life cycle. Every time you ever see something, Alien, Chronicles of Riddick, everything. There's especially in sci-fi, they focus on the life cycle of a monster, or it's any old cycle. Like in the case of Cthulhu, who sleeps in Aurelia, depending on how you pronounce it. When the galaxy turns and gets into just the right place, Cthulhu wakes up, and it's usually preceded by a hideous decade of nightmares that plague all of the savants of the world. They realize something bad's coming. Gozer's coming to Manhattan, folks. They all have that sense of cyclical, it's get up and go to work time. And by work, I mean subjugating the surface of the earth. So bear that in mind when you're designing your paradigm and you're designing your monster. You're designing a life cycle. And that's a big deal. So overlay all that stuff in an outline, folks. It'll help you. It'll go a long way. So we've had a lot of fun taking this apart. Now I want to ask you, I have great creatives with me here today, folks, ones that I respect very much. And I would like to give you an example, ask for an example. We'll start with Amber. Could you give me an example of a monster that is more of an original creation? And then tell us about that monster, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, what I've got that I'm most pleased with and is going to feature most prominently in a book of mine is the shadow wolves. Their fur changes color with the seasons, and they can sort of teleport from shadow to shadow.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Okay.
And they're also telepathic and intelligent, so they're pretty fearsome predators.
Yeah. So they have a multi-dimensional talent where they can slip into shadows. Like, in other words, I'll paint a picture. It's twilight. The golden sunlight is falling through a forest. And wherever the trees are, there are these lengthy shadows. And as the sun goes down, the shadows lengthen to the point of where they eventually become darkness. But if these shadow wolves were running through those woods, they would basically be hopping in and out. I'm asking, maybe you should tell me, they hop in and out of shadows as if it were like Bilbo putting the ring on.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So those are very, very cool. That's a multi-dimensional creature. Mm-hmm. It doesn't just live in the material plane. It has a body that can go into basically an underplane of shadow.
They can't stay there. They just sort of dip in and out.
Yeah, okay.
So they have to come back out again pretty much immediately into out of a different shadow.
Yeah, and those conditions arise from the paradigm of the world you're writing in, as well as the talent of the creature.
Mm-hmm.
Because writing in fantasy, you want to ornament your creatures and make them unique. Like all mythology, like all folklore, you want to give them something that is, that when people hear the story, they go, "Whoa, that's not good." A shadow, like what if that thing's coming after me? I'm dead. The whole point is to make them think, "Wow, there's always worse," and that imagination unpacks their response. Oh, I go get my shotgun, or I get in my car with my kids and I get out of there and get away as fast as possible. Those thoughts are the essence of the narrative to be. So that Shadow Wolf is really cool. And multi-dimensional things, especially with the augmentations that you've suggested, where it's also like intelligent, more intelligent, telepathic, and it probably has a variety of senses that are keen, like razor sharp. What inspired you to come up with that cool thing?
No, I just like wolves and I wanted to make them super nifty. Or, I mean, they're already pretty cool. Sounds like if I was to create a forest that was dominated by wolves, what kind of wolves would they be?
Yeah, right on. I mean, Enchanted Forest with Shadow Wolves, that's boss.
The really cool thing is they end up, they're friends with the elves and they end up raising one of their elf friends' abandoned babies when the elf friend gets killed.
Wow, Romulus and Remus in another dimension.
Yeah, something like that.
No, but the archetype is awesome. See, that's the thing about Monstercraft. There's a certain archetypology that goes in, be it Jungian or wherever you're drawing it from a mythic source purely. I mean, that's just very, very cool stuff. Tom,
Yes.
why don't you give us an example of your of a monster, an original monster that you're proud of?
Oh, okay. What I like is Grunda, who is a companion creature to Faye Danan Orin in the story Fury of the Fae, where Pentgrim comes home to his house, and his house, the family has been investigating the unknown, the paranormal, 4, 5, 6 generations at least. And the house he lived in, the one house he lives in, has all sorts of guards on it, or amulets and protective spirits and stuff on it. So he comes home not thinking, and sitting in the chair is this incredibly beautiful woman. And the first thing he says to her, he goes, "Yeah, I killed you 10 years ago." And she says, "Sorry." She goes, "I found a way to, I found a way that someone accidentally bled on my tomb and brought me back. And I came here to finish what we started 10 years ago." And so they're talking, and all of a sudden he realizes, he goes, "You brought Grunda with you." And she says, "Oh, I always bring Grunda with me." She goes, "While we're talking, he's having his way on the grounds. He lives on this big vineyard, Pentgrim."
Yeah.
And Grunda is a creature that she brings it forth, it has a base skeleton about the size of a Hummer or a minivan, and it attracts anything around it that's loose, leaves and license plates and garbage cans, to create the body that it can walk around on. And then it goes and it feeds on anything it finds: bears, deer, people. And as it's feeding, that muscle mass replaces the bits and pieces of junk that it's made of, until if it eats enough, flesh becomes this ankylosaurus looking thing from another dimension.
Cool.
And ankylosaurus, you could picture an ankylosaurus like a lot nastier, a lot more spines, And
yeah.
you know, and so not only in this story does Pencrum have to deal with this ancient creature that he can't seem to kill or keep dead, but is also her pet that's running on the grounds, and he's got to try to protect his family and all his employees, etc., while trying to get rid of both these creatures. And Grunda gets to be pretty nasty in the story. That there's a lot of creatures on the Pencrum estate, deer and turkeys and all sorts of other creatures, and it feasts on some of the deer and fish in the lake and stuff, and it
Sure,
gets to be
that's true.
pretty nasty.
Yeah.
And it cannot get to any of the employees or his wife or his mother, because they're inside the stone circle that's at the center of the vineyard, this ancient Stonehenge type circle of stones that is enchanted. Nothing can get at them while they're in the circle. So in the story, Grunda circles the circle of stones looking for an opening, as Pencrum is trying to get rid of this ancient Atlantean vampire.
A major problem even for him. You touch on something very brilliant there. The perhaps another dimension for our listeners when they're engaging in monstercraft. The subject of monster ecology. It bounces off of what Amber said also about the regionalization of creatures and their domains and the things that they require. But monsters sometimes are grouped together, aren't they? Sometimes it's not just one monster. Sometimes it's a monster that has another monster as a servant, or is in symbiosis with said monster, or is a parasite one into the other, or were created by some gene sorcerer for the purposes of a collective organism that behaves a certain way to achieve a certain end. This stuff sounds complex, and people go, oh, well, why would you ever think about it? Well, when you're questing for originality and authenticity, especially when you have OCD, you weaponize your OCD and you just let it go to the horizon. That's what I did. And I come up with all kinds of cool ideas through that creative process. So think about monster ecology when you're designing. Take that down and add it to the outline, something that almost slipped through the cracks. My monster that I'll contribute is this thing that I've been working on in Exsanguinator. And it's monstrous, but it's actually kind of like a helper. So really quick to break it in, imagine if Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, not only had to deal with his own treachery in his own country and also the Turks and Saracens besides in Eastern Europe, but imagine a giant starship crashed in medieval Transylvania, or I should say probably 1,000 years before. And ever since then, Transylvania, it's called Death's Valley in my book, but I'm trying to summarize quickly. There's these giant cannibalistic creatures that come out of the woods and they just snatch you up and gobble you up. Each one of them digs a special kind of, it's like some kind of serial killer organism. So what happened, the reason the ship crashed, hypothetically, because I haven't really thought about it yet, but one ship blew the other ship out of orbit and it came down because there was a conflict in orbit, probably around the equivalent time in Christ, like 2,000 years ago. So the one ship crashed and the survivors were able to get out of that ship. And it turns out that the survivors are these giant golden crabs with psychic power that radiate off of them. And they grow these organisms in what they call the holy bog. So the humans of Death's Valley have to fight these giant blood-sucking creatures that come out of the forest at night. So they've teamed up with the psychic crabs. And when they lay down in the holy bog, this thing happens to them. There's freshwater octopus that live in the holy bog, and they drink blood in order to sustain themselves. And there's freshwater horseshoe crab-like creatures too, a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, a little bit more intelligent than Earth models. They come from somewhere else. So the psychic crab uses the brains of the octopi, and he conditions them with hypnosis, like a telepathic hypnosis, a neural engagement. And all the octopus, they wrap around each other and twine their limbs, and they create this armor called the Vrumzu. They coat the warrior, and then the horseshoe crabs coat the octopi, and they all get bound together with this secretion. So it's a biotechnical suit, but it's monstrous. Its eyes are glowing red, like all the octopi eyes are glowing red. And they have their suckers in the meat, taking little drips of blood from the symbiosis to maintain their conditioned armor, like the state of their armor. So therefore, if like, they benefit the organism, because the more blood comes in contact with the organism, the stronger the Vrumzu symbiote becomes. And it eventually, and it acts as an external musculature. So it adds like 5 to 8 times the strength of a human being to whoever's wearing it, because octopus are very, very strong creatures. So when they're all working together that way, it's easy to see. It's easy to see how that would benefit. So beyond these misted mothers, these giant cannibals that live in the East, you have a new kind of monster, the symbiosis transforming a human into, a more efficient killer. That's its own kind of monster, the essence of symbiosis. Tom, how do you have you ever written about symbiosis?
Creatures that are like, or are parasitic relationship thing?
Yeah, a tight ecology where there's that interrelationship, sometimes for benefit, sometimes for bail. Do you ever explore that?
Not as of yet, as far as I could recall. No. Might be interesting to come up with something. Maybe Pentgrim could do have a parasitic something or other. I mean, I did it in my role-playing days. I came up with quite a few parasitic things. But not in fiction yet.
Well, that's something to mill. I enjoy that myself. How about you, Amber? You dig on parasites and symbiotes? You ever work anything like that into your stories?
Not really. I have a sort of idea that I'm playing around with for a psychological fantasy, I guess. Where the elven, no, I think she's half elf. Half elf character has voices in the head that turn out to be lingering spirits of some kind from a tragedy in her past, and they kind of possess her a little.
Yeah, well, that's of a similar theme because it's a multi-dimensional ecology, and therefore it doesn't have to have a body in order for it to be a parasite or a symbiote. It just has to have that interaction, that interrelationship. So you are right. That is a similar structure. Well, this episode's been a blast. They say when, time flies when you're having fun. And this isn't Motor Vehicle Commission. This is JWC. So these episodes are so fun to make. They fly by. So now it's time to plugs. That's how you keep the lights on, right? That's how you get your muse out there. So Amber, how about you go first? Why don't you plug what you plug in as far as your book?
Well, right now available on Kindle, I've only got Death's Nightmare and the sequel Death's Gamble. But anybody looking for anything different should keep their eyes peeled, because I'm 4 illustrations short of releasing The Shattered Sky, my dinosaur apocalypse novel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of monsters, man, I love what you're doing with that. I love the voice of that. So Death's Nightmare, folks. Amber Danson, Amazon.com. Go to your app. Check it out. We'll have you on for a read sometime soon. All right, Amber. Tom, I mean, you guys, the audience could also let their fingers do the walking and go back last year. Look for Amber in the thumbnail. She does great reads back then.
Sure.
Believe me, you won't be disappointed. You'll be inspired. Tom, plug it up, bro.
I have 2 short story collections on Amazon Kindle, Dwellers in the Shadows, and the second one is called Is It Still Out There? Lots of little creepy monsters. I just released a new nonfiction work, about 60 pages, called So You Want to Be a Writer. If you're looking for some tips on how to start writing and how to think of ideas, journaling and places, quiet, finding time to write, a place to write. You know, I go into all that, and it was a lot of fun to write, and hopefully someone will get some benefit out of that, because everybody starts off, they're a little scared, or oh my God, what am I supposed to do? This is a reassuring set of what do you call it? Tips and tricks and common sense about getting ready to write. And,
guidelines, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with having fun, you know.
Right. And I have an Amazon Bella serial novel that I'm going to release episode 12 tonight.
That's awesome. I've been checking that out. That's well written.
Okay.
Yep. It's called Of Thieves, Dragons, and O'Hara. And it's about a gentleman named O'Hara driving home one night, 2:00 in the morning, sees this black square in the road ahead of him. He doesn't think anything of it. He drives into it, wakes up in the mud in front of a character that I happen to really like. Her name is Shirella, in this village of Valtour in the world of Verema. And he has no memories left of his Earth past, and he's got to start from scratch. And so Shirella and some friends around town help him get on his feet and figure out what he might want to do with his life, and now that he's stuck in Verema forever. So,
all right, folks, you heard it. Tom Tiernan, go check out his short story stuff, his book on writing, and he's doing Amazon Vella. We got to do a show on Vella, Tom,
yes,
where you explain, maybe even next week, for our book craft. So guys, I'm Ricky O. My author name is Richard Andrew Olkis. I have a book on Amazon called Nidhogg Chronicles, Crusade of Shadows. Check that out. Give it a spin if you like paranormal fiction. If you like the picture that Tom has, for example, on his screen for him, there's some stuff like that going on in there. It's a story about abduction phenomena, ufology and abduction phenomena, but instead of the abducted is the perspective, the abductor is the perspective. So give it a whirl and let us know what you think. Head to joeswritersclub.com. Head to joeswriters.club. Sign up for our forums. Go to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and most importantly, go to our YouTube channel, Joe's Writers Club, JWC, on YouTube. Like and subscribe, share with your friends, especially if you like the content we're doing. And try to pick our books. I'm going to drop some links in the comments. If you like what we're talking about, we take this stuff seriously, buy one of our books. That would be swell. JWC can't make you a better writer. JWC can make you a different writer, though. If you take our advice, it's up to you to make yourself a better writer by putting it down and obsessing creatively. I want to thank our special guest, Amber Danson, for coming on the program. I want to thank Tom Tiernan, the co-host, making stuff easy and awesome and fun to talk about. And these are creatives. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I've read both I read books of theirs. I've read stories of theirs. They're excellent. So those people who try and put stuff down, go and support them. We nobody artists, make us somebody artists. That would be swell. Stay creative, folks. We'll see you sometime soon. Take care.
I'll be seeing you.
Bye, everyone.